رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة تسبيحها الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين بالقاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. صلوا على
اللهم صل على محمد.
السلام عليكم. I've been talking the past 2 nights regarding the soul, the personal reformation that is required and expected of us as human beings living in this very temporary world, that our lives must have a meaning, and that above all, that meaning is directed not only towards Allah, but towards our fellow social beings, other human beings. Before I get into today's topic, I want to mention 1 or 2 things about the Quran itself, because to me, our world should revolve around the Quran. The Quran for us is not just a book, it's the word of Allah. One of the wives of the Prophet was asked, what sort of a person was Muhammad? What kind of a man was he? And she replied, he lived with the Quran. In other words, what the Quran was in book form, Muhammad was that Quran in human form. If ever the Quran was to take a human form, it would be the personality of the Prophet himself. That's the kind of thing that we should revolve ourselves around the Quran. But it's very easy for us just to open the Quran. And by the way, there is a difference between reading the Quran and reciting the Quran. We don't talk about qira'atul Quran, we talk about tilawatul Quran. When you read, it's just like an encyclopedia or a book. You open it, read it, close it, put it back on the shelf. But when you're reciting something, you are not only reading it, but you're putting it into your heart. In other words, it comes and flows within you. This is what we mean by living the Quran. It is part of your entire existence. It's not just something that you refer to. It's something that you live by. As I said, we recite the Quran. If you notice, and we talk about this more and more, Imam Hussein alayhi salam had a habit that almost at every point something happens, he would recite a verse from the Quran. The whole night, that Shabi Ashur, the night of Ashur, he was reciting the Quran also. Particular verses which related to his own situation. For example, he would recite, وَلَا يَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ إِنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ لِيَزْدَادُوا إِثْمًا وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. Those who do kufr, this is a verse of the Quran that Imam Muslim would recite. See what I mean by it was within his heart? Those who do kufr, they should not think that we are giving them more time because it is good for them. Rather than we're giving them more time so that they can increase their sins. But one day, they will suffer a painful punishment. This verse was directed by Imam Hussein towards those who are willing to kill him. And there are many other instances too. But how do we recite the Quran? There are different ways, and I think that we should pay a little bit of attention to this. That there are different ways of doing it. There are those, I'm doing myself, my latest book that I'm working on is on the tafsir of the Quran. It's not on the Quran itself, but the history of the Shia tafsir of the Quran. And what I'm discovering that I'd like to share with you is that there are those who just, there's a verse of the Quran, put a hadith under it, and that's enough. Whether that hadith actually relates to the verse or not is immaterial. Sometimes it doesn't even relate. That's one way of doing it. There are those who just do some tadabbur, that's thinking about the Quran. There's another way of doing it. But to me, the best way is not only reciting the Quran, but also reading about the Quran. In other words, yes, you recite the Quran, but remember the Quran is not in a chronological order. It was not compiled that way. So the very first surah that was revealed was actually surah number 96, Surah Al-Alaq. It wasn't Surah Al-Fatiha. What I'm trying to say is that if you just recite the Quran from cover to cover, which is important, I do not deny that, but you lose track of the whole picture of the Quran, what the Quran is trying to tell us. There is another way, which is to look at the Quran as what's called tafsir al-mawdu'i, what is called thematic understanding of the Quran. Look at the Quran and the themes that it presents. There are various books, even in English, by the way. One of the best books I read when I was a graduate student a long time ago was one by Professor Fazlur Rahman. He's written a book called Major Themes of the Quran. By the way, he was Pakistani and very controversial. So, but at least some, even those who are controversial in their views, but they do good things. And this is one of the major books. There are others, thematic books or themes of the Quran. This book was called Major Themes of the Quran, and he looks at different themes. What you do is you bring in all the different verses. And the person in our own times, although he's passed away now, who does this best was Allama Tabatabai. His tafsir is a master work. Although it's what we call a heavy book, Sankine, the Polish one. But it is a heavy book, not in terms of weight, but also in terms of the philosophical analysis. It's not something that you read on a Sunday afternoon when you're trying to sleep. No, it's not like that. In any case, the point being that we should read about the Quran rather than just the Quran itself. Read the Quran, recite the Quran, yes, but also in order to understand and get a bigger picture of the Quran, of what it expects out of us, then look at it thematically. These days, we talk of cell phones. Cell phones have become very, very important in our lives. We talk of a selfie, right? What do you do with a selfie? Turn it around so you see yourself. Same thing with the Quran. Rather than seeing the Quran talking about others, look at it talking about yourself, about myself. There are two ways of looking. A glass is a glass. But there's a difference between a window and a mirror, isn't there? A window, you see the outside. A mirror, you see yourself. Treat the Quran as a mirror. How do I fit in vis-a-vis the Quran? When the Quran talks about the characteristics of a hypocrite, na'udhu billah, God forbid, am I in one of those? When the Quran talks about those who do good, am I in one of those? If not, then how can I be in one of those? This is what we call hiwar ma'al Quran. Hiwar means dialoguing. You are dialoguing, you are actually seeing yourself, and almost you feel the Quran is talking to you. This is what we mean by the Quran. Turning to today's topic then, if I was to ask you, what does the Quran expect out of us as human beings? Just to pray and fast? This is just one aspect. There are two main challenges, as far as I can see, that the Quran is putting forth for us. One is what we call taqwa. Taqwa has been translated very loosely. When I was young, and I'm still young, but I was a bit younger than now, in Zanzibar, of all places. You heard of Zanzibar? Zanzibar is a little island in East Africa. It became famous recently when they realized I was born there. In any case, enough of my joke. In any case, then, what we find is that we were told that Allah is just waiting to hit you. It was a very despotic, tyrannical Allah. That's the way that I was raised. You almost hated Allah, na'udhu billah, because of the way that it was presented to us. What we call, we used to say in Swahili, but those who speak Swahili, Mungu na Mungu. Mungu is God in Swahili. Mungu is what we call tanda, patak. Just waiting to smack you. But it's not the sense of taqwa. Taqwa is not only to be afraid of God, it's more of to be aware of the presence of Allah in your life. Taqwa is a kind of an inner light within you. So that when you are about to do something wrong, it comes between you and your sins. That is what we mean by taqwa. A kind of an inner torch or inner policeman or policewoman, depending on how you look at it, but something which prevents you from doing wrong. It's taqwa itself. Remember that verse that I recited last night. Ittaqullaha wa yu'allimukum Allah. Have the taqwa of Allah and Allah will teach you because of that taqwa of Allah. So one of the challenges that the Quran expects out of us is to have a human being who's morally upright, who's conscious of the divine presence in his or her life. The second challenge is for me, for you, for all of us to play our roles in creating a just society, a society based on justice and equality. It is because of this social dimension that whenever the Quran talks, almost whenever it talks of Iman, it talks also of Amal Salih. Did you notice that? وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. In other words, you cannot have just Iman on its own. You cannot have just good deeds on its own. You need both of them together to become good human beings. Taqwa on one side, and a just society, a person who's morally conscious towards his or her social duties on the other. That is why we always say that our ibadat are connected with our mu'amalat. Ibadat was Allah. Mu'amalat was fellow human beings. Have we noticed that even in Salatul Jama'ah, we are highly recommended to pray the prayers together with others? That if you have 10 people in Jama'ah, in congregation, the thawab that you get is, you cannot even count it. Even when we, for example, we go around the Kaaba, we're doing it with others, we're brushing our shoulders, and so on. In other words, because ibadat is connected with our mu'amalat. When we go for Hajj, we are not allowed to fight or abuse with anybody when we are in the state of ihram. You're praying Salatul Layl, for example, Namaz al-Shab, Tahajjud. Yet we are told, and it is highly recommended, to remember at least 40 marhumin, or even those who are alive. It doesn't have to be marhumin. In other words, you're praying to Allah, but yet you are remembering your social dimension. You're praying for each other. In our ibadat, we should be remembering not only our duty towards Allah, but also the sins that we have committed against fellow human beings. What ibadat does is to remind us of the rights of other human beings towards us. My sisters and brothers, our social acts influence our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I was saying last night, you can pray, you are ready to pray, everything is clean, but you are praying in a position or a place which is mafsooq, which is actually somebody else's property. You can't do it. Because in order to be spiritually pure, we have to be morally and socially pure. Sallu ala Muhammad. That is what we mean when I say that correct believing is deeply connected with correct living. If you believe correctly, you must live correctly also. I can't be praying to Allah and at the same time, now we'll be like swindling others. There's something wrong with my prayers then. Islam not only talks of ideals. The Quran actually wants us to be real human beings and therefore gives us real principles of how to create a just society. It's not only about idea, this is what we should be, you should be. It's about how we are going to live. One of the key principles that we all know about But I wonder if we have thought about it very deeply. And the Quran talks about it again and again and again. Al-Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy bil Munkar. Why the Quran talks about it so much? What does it mean to do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy bil Munkar? Again, we lose the bigger picture many a time by reading a verse without the proper context. Every verse has a context, by the way. If you don't know the context, then that verse will not make sense to you because it's connected to a particular historical, social, philosophical context. The reason why Amr bil Ma'ruf is so important is not only about telling others off. Brother, you should pray. Brother, you should fast. You shouldn't drink alcohol. It's more than that. It's actually a social principle to keep the conscience alive. My conscience, then your conscience. I can't tell you to do something if I don't do it myself. See, there are different levels of suicide. A person can commit suicide, God forbid, physically by taking his or her own life. But there is another form of suicide, it's called moral suicide. When we actually kill our own conscience, sometimes we need somebody to come and awaken that conscience. This is Amr bil Ma'ruf. Those who are morally strong help those who are morally weak. Do you understand? It's a way for all of us to become morally conscious human beings. And that's why one of the key principles of the whole uprising of Imam Hussein was this, Amr bil Ma'ruf. People, don't you see, the truth is not being practiced. And the falsehood is not being prohibited. What is this Imam Hussein is saying? Truth is not being practiced. Falsehood is not being prohibited. So Amr bil Ma'ruf then is a key principle that the Quran advocates for and asks us to uphold. Look at this verse. Surah Al-Imran, verse 110. كُنْتُمْ خَيْرُ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You are the best community, the best people who has been brought forth for the people, for human beings. Why are we the best people? تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ بِالْمُنكَرِ. Because you practice. If all of you want to become the best community, this is not something that we have to practice. And by the way, when it comes to morally uprightness, upholding everyone's morals and helping others, those who are morally weak, gender is not an issue at all. Sometimes when a woman tells a man, say, oh my God, who is she to tell me? Huh? We have that ego within us that a woman cannot tell a man. Look at the Quran again. Surah Al-Tawbah. المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض. The believing men and the believing women are actually, they are awliya, they are protectors. They are guardians of each other. Women protect men, men protect women. It's not only one way, my friend. And why? تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. Because you do Amr bil Ma'ruf and you forbid what is evil. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Allah.
The Quran tells us something else also. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Lima taquluna ma la taf'alun is asking us a question. Why do you tell others to do something that you don't do it yourself? Before I tell you, I have to do it. If I tell you not to do something, I should not be doing it myself because Allah hates that. But I tell others to do something, and I don't do it myself. Remember this much also. When the Prophet ﷺ came, he was not only attacking the Qurayshis because of their many gods. That was only part of the problem. He was also attacking the Quraysh because of their social practices or wrongdoings. That how can you, as a human being, treat a slave like that? How can you look down upon the people? How can the rich grow richer while the poor are growing poorer? In other words, this is what bothered the Quraysh a lot. Because he, the Prophet himself, was upsetting their social order. So we say misorder. Because of their wrong practices. He wasn't only saying that you worship only one God. They said, okay, we'll worship your God. End of story. But no, he was saying your practices, the way that you are acting is completely wrong. In other words, he was saying that you cannot have faith in Allah and then exploit people at the same time. There is another principle that the Quran clearly outlines for this social upliftment. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان. Allah said that Allah is not recommending you, He's commanding you. Because there are different kinds of verses in the Quran. There are what we call Mawlavi and Irshadi verses. Irshadi is when Allah just recommends us to do something, advises us. Al-walidatu yurdi'na awladahunna hawlayni kamilayn. That the mothers will suckle their children for 2 years. It's not a requirement. It's actually a recommendation. They did not have powder milk in those days. But here the Quran says, Inna Allah ya'muru, that He commands you that you will be just and you will do beautiful deeds. Al-adl wal-ihsan. In other words, in order to create a good society, you cannot be unjust to anybody. Faith is, my friends, not only connected with how we implement justice. Faith is also connected to how we react to injustice also. When there is wrongdoing, when there is something which is happening wrong, and to me it doesn't affect me, I don't care. There's a problem there also. Because Martin Luther would say that, what was it that he said? That injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If there is injustice anywhere in the world, one day it will come and hit you too. And therefore, we may not be able to do something, at least say something, feel something, whether it is in Cambodia, whether it is whatever it may be, there is some wrongdoing. Don't feel that indifferent. Because when we are indifferent, you know what happens? Our conscience becomes blurred. We don't feel what is wrong. And the Quran says, at least feel something. If you can say something, if you can write something, but do not be indifferent at all. So important is this concept of justice and feeling what is right and wrong in the Quran. Again, look at the Quran, how it stresses the concept of justice in order to create a society based on justice. People who have a sense of justice within them. كونوا قوامين بالقسط, the Quran says. Addressing the believers by it. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط. You will stand up for justice. ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين. Even if it means that you have to bear witness against your own self. Can you imagine bearing witness against your own self? Or you bear witness against your own parents. Who will go to court and bear witness against his or her own parents? You have to do it if they are wrong. Our aqrabi, or those who are close to you. But you will never ever sacrifice certain principles. Justice has no exception, my friends. You cannot be unjust even to your enemies. Because the Quran says, وَلَا يَجْرَمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنَ قَوْمٍ أَنْ لَا تَعْدِلُوا. Do not let the hatred of a people make you swerve away from justice. Just because you hate somebody, you cannot treat them unjustly. اعْدِلُوا وَأَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى, the Quran says. Be just. Because if you want to attain taqwa, you have to be just to everybody, including those who do wrong to you. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As I said, the Quran does not treat the two in isolation of human beings and God. They are deeply connected to each other. Look at this particular verse, which is a very famous verse in Surah Al-Hujurat, which talks about how human beings of different tribes, different faith should come together. Many a time, as I said, we look down upon non-Muslims, for example. Allah says you can't do that. Ya ayyuhan nas. The address here is to all human beings. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. We have created you, all of you, from one male and one female. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلًا. We have made you into different tribes And different nations, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may know each other. You may be connected with each other. And as I said, the address here is to all humanity. إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. Indeed, the most honorable of you in the eyes of Allah is the most pious. The address is to all human beings. You want to attain honor, you have to be pious, and you have to be aware of your social responsibilities. That's why, by the way, the ulama of akhlaq, they say there are two kinds of akhlaq. There is mahasimul akhlaq or makarimul akhlaq. Mahasimul akhlaq is when somebody does good, we do good to them. You greet me, I greet you. You ignore me, khalas, he ignores me. I ignore him too. This is mahasin akhlaq. But makarim al-akhlaq is a daraja, is a higher level, whereby you do good even if somebody does wrong to you. In other words, you don't fall down to their levels. This is how we create a good, upright society, my friends. That we do good because goodness is within us, even if they morally fail. As I always give an example that when you take an orange, when you squeeze it, what will come out? Not apple juice, orange juice, because there's orange juice of orange in it. So if somebody does wrong to you and you show hatred and evil, then you know what is inside you. But you say, I'm going to do good to you. You know, we were in a group with Ayatollah Sistani a long time ago, and that was one of the rare opportunities where we were invited to ask questions. One of my students was with me, and he said, and I was going to translate, he said, can you ask that what can he share with us of his life experience? What can we take away from him that we can use in our lives? And Ayatollah himself, he gave a few statements. Then he said, one other thing, he says, learn to forgive. Learn to forgive. Because as long as you don't forgive, you have a grudge within you. You cannot heal if you do not forgive, my friends. And that is one other socially principle. When the Quran talks of Amal Saleh, upright deeds, you'll see that it does not define it. There are different kinds of acts which fall under Amal Saleh. You give something to somebody, that's Amal Saleh. You smile at somebody, that is Amal Saleh. You go and visit the sick, Amal Saleh. Forgive somebody who has violated you, who has done wrong to you, that is Amal Saleh also. So there's a wide range of acts that the Quran talks. That is why, by the way, the Quran links Iman wa Amal Saleh, and it talks of Amal Saleh 120 times. These days, with all these databases, it's easy to count. Before we have to go through the Quran verse by verse. But now we just at the press of a button, all the times and everywhere Saleh is mentioned in the Quran comes in front of you. 120 times in one form or another. Why does the Quran emphasize akhlaq, ethics, and society so much? Because when we are unethical, then we lose state or we lose touch with our conscience. When you lose touch with your conscience, we lose touch with Allah. Because Allah talks to us through our conscience himself. When the conscience no longer speaks to us, Allah doesn't speak to us either. We remove, as I said, that we remove Allah from our conscience. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I heard this story a long time ago, and I would like to share it with you of what it means to Amal Saleh, even those we don't agree with. It is said that Nabi Ibrahim had a habit that he would bring a guest to his home every night for dinner, So he brought somebody, yes, a stranger. Yes, but before we start, we say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, because we eat in the name of God. The guest said, I can't do that. I said, why not? So I don't believe in God. I don't believe in God. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say that I'm studying in the name of God. I don't even believe in. I'm sorry that we can't have dinner together because we have to have the name of God in it. So the guy said, fine, I will leave. This he was honest about it. Then Allah spoke to Ibrahim and said, why did you do that? Ibrahim said, because he did not mention your name before. Allah said to Ibrahim, according to this story, Ya Ibrahim, his whole life he has never mentioned me, nor he will remember me, but I feed him every day. I make sure that he has food every day. Once only he did not mention me, what you can you die food? The food comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember this one, Allah is the one who gives risk to everybody. When it rains, for example, Allah doesn't give the rain and the water only to Muslims. It gives it to everybody. Because Allah's ni'mah, Allah's water, Allah's food is for all human beings. And therefore we as human beings cannot discriminate against others.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Our social responsibilities, my friends, does not only mean to do good to people, it also means to grow in our ethics. Because there are different levels of akhlaq. If we are doing good, we shouldn't be just content with it. On the contrary, we should always count how can I do better. You will have remember there was a very famous hadith by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, he says, I have been sent to perfect the akhlaq. The Quran reminds us, إِنَّكَ عَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are at the highest level of akhlaq. What does it tell us? That there are levels of akhlaq. The Prophet did not say that I have been sent to show you akhlaq. He says, so that I can perfect. In other words, there are levels to perfection of akhlaq. And therefore, one of our main duties is not only to do good, but to do even more good, higher than what we can. Many a time when we do good, we expect somebody to thank us. If you are doing it for Allah, you do not need even those thanks. Our ibadat then is connected to our ethics. And if you look at it, you will see that the Quran connects our ibadat with how we behave with others. The Quran says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Fasting has been ordained upon you, just as it was ordained upon those before you. Why? So that we can attain taqwa. Fasting is connected with moral responsibility also. Similarly, when it comes to prayers, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ. Prayers keeps you away from that which is wrong and that which is corrupt. So when I pray to Allah, but those prayers of mine should have an effect on how I treat with others. As I said, even when we go for Hajj, when we wear the ihram, we're not allowed to abuse, fight, or swear at anybody. True ibadat also makes us aware of our responsibilities to others. Sometimes these stories that we narrate, whether they are factual or not, is not the point. There's a moral behind that story. And it's the moral that is important. You'll remember, some of you, I talked about the snail and the fish the other day, that you cannot deny something you do not know. There is a story that Malik al-Ashtar, the great companion of Imam Ali, he came to Kufa and was visiting. As a visitor, some people like to do pranks. There was one shopkeeper, he took some dust and stones and threw it at Malik, not knowing that this is the governor of Imam Ali in Egypt. Somebody came to the shopkeeper and said, what did you do? This guy is a stranger here. So just played some tricks on him. And I said, he is Malik al-Ashtar. You better be careful, you better go and apologize. There could be repercussions for you. So the shopkeeper went after Malik al-Ashtar and saw Malik entered the mosque in Kufa. So he went with Malik and waited there. Malik prayed. And then the shopkeeper went and said, Malik, I'm so sorry. I did not know who you are. I should not have done it. Malik says, it is because of you that I came here. I came here to pray for you. not only for myself. In other words, our ibadah should not only be for ourselves, it should also be for others also. The Quran makes us aware of our social responsibilities. Therefore, it says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will never attain uprightness until you give what you love most. Not second-hand clothes, which you don't need. You give what you love most. That is part of our social responsibility. We cannot be indifferent to others. In another verse, Surah Al-Ma'un,
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل فرج.
The Quran, Surah Al-Ma'un, the Quran is asking us, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Haven't you seen those who go against their faith? They have faith, but their actions go against their faith. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. They go against their own path, their own religion. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ. He is the one who keeps away or deprives the yatim. The yatim, by the way, are mentioned 23 times in the Quran. Why? Because they're very vulnerable. They are the ones who need support most because they do not have a father. Sometimes they do not have parents. And therefore the Quran gives special importance to the yatim. So much so it says, you eat the property of a yatim, you have put fire in your stomach. That's very strong language the Quran uses. Even miskin, we know the year of miskin. Miskin is somebody who's at a standstill in his or her life. Somebody who needs to move on, who needs help to move on. Not only perpetual help, but rather to help him or her to move on in his life. My sisters and brothers, what we're talking of is that our connection with Allah is highly dependent on how we behave with those around us. And therefore the Quran says, even when we talk, we're not even talking about helping others financially. Even when we talk, قُلْ لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, the Quran says. Speak to people in a beautiful way. Not just Christian, not just yourself. Our concern should be to humanity. I always say, you cannot be a good Muslim until you are a good human being first. You can't be a human being without being a Muslim. Some human beings are not Muslim. But in order to be a good Muslim, you have to be a good human being first. Because that is our first identity as humanity. Islam comes below that. But at the level of humanity, there's no boundaries. Imam Ali is walking in the streets of Kufa and with his companions, and he finds a poor man, a person who's obviously hungry, not well dressed. The Imam turns to his companions and says, Ma hada? And they said, this is just a Christian who's just visiting Kufa. The Imam says, I did not ask you, Man hada? I did not ask you, who is this? I asked you, what is this? Whether he's a Jew or Christian is immaterial. He's a human being. And as long as Ali ibn Abi Talib is the Khalifa of this community, no human being will walk like him. This is a concern for humanity that Amir al-Mu'mineen is teaching us. And time is running short, I know. But one or two anecdotes before we talk about Karbala itself. That after the Battle of the Camel, we've all heard of the Battle of Jamal, of the Camel, who was defeated, etc. Aisha sent a letter to Imam Ali. Because Aisha had adopted Abdullah ibn Abbas as Abdullah ibn Zubair, Abdullah ibn Zubair as her adopted son. So please excuse him, because Abdullah had also gone against Imam Ali. The Imam says, why only Abdullah ibn Zubair? Anybody who repents and will not fight against me, they are forgiven. Those same people who fought against him, who killed some of the Sahaba of the Prophet, Imam Ali forgave him. But that was the sense of human responsibility and forgiveness that he had within him.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
When Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad was commissioned by Yazid to go to Kufa, he completely blocked Kufa with threats, with force. Nobody could come into Kufa without being caught or leave Kufa. He basically established terror within Kufa. But he also knew that he wanted Imam Hussein captain. And when he heard that Hud had stopped Imam Hussein in the desert, he asked his people, who is the one who will go and give me the lay'ah of Hussein? Because whoever does that, he shall be given a big reward, a reward of rank. And you know who stood up and said, I will do it? Umar ibn Sa'ad. Sa'ad bin Waqqas. Sa'ad bin Waqqas, the father of Umar ibn Sa'ad, was a companion of the Prophet, a major companion. But you cannot imagine, see, people emphasize the world so much, because they think that this world is going to last with them forever. You either live in this world or the world lives within you. We all live in this world. But when the world lives within us, it totally captures us. It totally envelopes us, and we forget our whole purpose in life. It is interesting that the nephew of Umar ibn Sa'd came up to him and says, Uncle, don't do that. Don't ever go against Hussein ibn Ali. You know who he is? He is the grandson of the Prophet. The Prophet loved him so much. You know what is interesting is that some of these people who are fighting against Imam Hussein, they were very pious people. It is said that Umar ibn Sa'd would walk with his shoes slightly above the ground so that he would not trample on the ants and the insects on the ground. He's more concerned about the ants and the insects than the blood of Hussein. So that I was saying tonight is the eve of the 3rd of Muharram. Some reports say that it was on this day, on the 2nd, others said the 3rd, Hussein arrived in Karbala. He had already been, was walking with horse. They were riding with horse. The agreement with Hud was that Hussein will not go towards a direction, either towards Kufa or towards Medina until they get fresh orders from Ibn Ziyad. The time came when somebody comes from Kufa. He does not greet Imam Hussein, goes straight to Hud. So these are the orders from Ibn Ziyad. When Ibn Ziyad says to Hud, whenever you get this letter of mine, stop Hussein right there. And make sure that he does not get any water. You know, just as Uthman was denied water, even though it wasn't him, he wasn't Imam Hussein, all Imam Ali denied was water. They were preventing for Uthman, stopped in the middle of the desert. Imam Hussein is riding, and suddenly, according to some reports, the horse stops. Imam Hussein changes up to 7 horses, but they do not move anymore. He asks the people, what is this land called? They said, Furat, Chartwell Furat. Any other name for it? Nainawa. Any other name for it? Some said Bahadur. And finally someone said, it is also called Karbala. Now, means Bala. Bala also is difficult. Imam Hussain said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This is where we reach our destination. This is where we will be killed. This is where we will be martyred ourselves. Imam Hussein kept his people around them. He said the people down were actually obstructing the Imam. The Imam would not move anymore. Some riwayat said that the Imam went to the people. There was a small village there. The Banu Asad were living there. He said to people, if you want, you can help me. But if you cannot come to my help, at least when we are dead, then come and bury us. And if you would not bury us, you come to the children. You, the children, should come and bury us if your parents do not do that. You can imagine Imam Hussein in the searing heat, in the desert of Karbala, one by one, on the day of Ashur, His companions are giving their life. There were very few in the army of Hussein. There were thousands coming with Ibn Ziyad, and more reinforcements were coming from Kufa. Some say up to 30,000 people. Others say more, others say less. One of the few people who was able to come to Imam Hussein was a person by the name of Abdullah ibn Ubayy, Abu Wahab as he's called. His actual name was Abdullah ibn Ubayy al-Kalbi. Abu Wahab was very brave and very noble. When he heard that Hussein was in Karbala, he said, I must go to Hussein. Him and his wife, they came to Karbala. On the day of Ashur, Abu Wahab said to Imam Hussein that I must go and give my life for him. He goes, he fights a noble battle. When he falls down on the ground, you know what happened? His wife was very much in love with him. She goes to the battlefield. Imam Hussein calls her back that you are not supposed to go to the battlefield. He says, I cannot leave my husband alone. Shimr Mal'un turns to Rustam, his slave, and he says, oh Rustam, take care of her too. She is the only woman who's killed on the day of Ashur in Karbala. One by one, the companions of Hussein are giving their lives for Hussein. A person by the name of Burayd comes to Imam Hussein. Burayd is a Qari also, a reciter of the Quran, one who has memorized the Quran. Burayd is looking around the place of Karbala. He notices and knows somebody there. His name was Yazid bin Mu'qil. Burayd calls Yazid. Do you remember me? You know me? Yazid says, yes. He says, why are you fighting against Hussein then? Yazid says, because I have been asked to do so. Burayd says, we will settle the matter right here now. Today we're going to have a Mumahida in Karbala between these two friends, Burayd and Yazid. Burayd says to Yazid, we will fight. Whoever is the victor, he is on the true path. The two friends fight. A time comes when the people heard Allahu Akbar, that was Burayd who will kill his own friend. A time comes that even Burayd gives his life as a Hussein. I want to recite about one person who was so noble, who actually changed sides. He said, Suhaib bin Qayn. Suhaib was an Uthmani. He was a person who loved Uthman. But when he saw Hussein on the path, they happened to be traveling along the same path. Imam Hussein called him. Zuhair came to Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein talked to him. We do not know what happened then. But immediately Zuhair comes back to his tent and he says to his people, I'm joining Hussein. We do not know what was the conversation between Zuhair and Imam Hussein, except on the day of Ashur, before the fighting starts, Zuhair and Habib come to the people. Zuhair says to Habib, talk to them. Habib says, you are better and more eloquent, you talk to them. Zuhair said to the people, oh people, why are you fighting Hussein? What has he done to you? Don't you know he's the grandson of the Prophet? Somebody says to Zuhair, you are an Uthmani. Why are you fighting with him? You should be fighting against Hussein. Zuhair said, I'm not like you people. I never invited Hussein. But when I saw him, when I talked to him, ذكرت رسول الله. I remembered the Prophet ومنزله إياه, and his position with the Prophet. I realized that if I was to fight against Hussein, I would be fighting against the Prophet also. When Hussein is praying that Salat al-Khawf on the day of Ashur, you know what Zuhair does? He is the one who's shielding Imam Hussein. These so-called Muslims would not let Hussein pray in peace. They were firing arrows, spears at him. Zuhair would take them on his shield. As Hussein, a time comes when Zuhair falls on the ground. Hussein goes running to him. Zuhair says, Kabna Rasulullah, accept my final salam. One final anecdote. When Hussein was praying the salat of fear, one person called Sa'id bin Abdullah Sa'id is the one who's also coming between the arrows and the spears and Hussein. Many a time he would take the arrows on his own chest in order to defend Imam Hussein. When Imam Hussein finishes the prayer, as soon as he finishes the prayer, Sa'id falls on the ground. Hussein goes running to him. There was only one question that Sa'id asked. He opens his eyes and he says, Awafaitu yabna Rasulillah. Have you prayed your prayers? Because if you have prayed, I have finished what I have done my deed. Mother Hussein.